practices, building and evolving high-performing PMOs, presented by Echolocity. And my name is Molly Yanus. I'm the founder and a solution consultant here at Echolocity, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. So today we are going to be focusing on project management, and I have some key learning objectives, which are common project challenges and the value of a PMO. So this webinar should help you build a business case for your organization to have a PMO or to invest further in your PMO. We're going to talk about 3 different examples for PMO, which is 1, creating one, 2, expanding it to be organization-wide versus a single business unit, and the 3rd is a continuous improvement initiative to get more value from your PMO investment. We'll be talking about best practices for intake, review, approval, and governance in PMO. We'll be talking about the roles and responsibilities of key people within a PMO. And then we're also going to be diving in a little bit deeper into project prioritization methodologies and use cases, and specific ways to track PMO value and some of those KPIs and things like that. We'll also touch on some of those, what I call prerequisites of actually having a PMO that adds value to the organization. So things that you really need to get started. So I hope you're in the right place. You'll see the agenda throughout over here on the side. We'll do a really quick introduction. So Echolocity is a work management service organization. We do a lot with training of people on project management and PMO methodologies. We do some staff augmentation for organizations that have projects and need short-term staffing for them. We do process improvement, both PMO, work management, business process analysis and automation and things like that. We also implement technology or help organizations implement technology to have a better experience, find their flow with work management, project management. If you've heard me say project management and work management interchangeably throughout, traditionally, it has been project management. There's been a movement in some of the spaces to be calling it collaborative work management and expand it out past simple projects. So these methodologies apply whether you're a project organization, a service organization, a product organization, agile versus traditional, Kanban, hybrid. We're not going to get deep into the different project methodologies. We'll kind of talk about it at a high level and then really focus more on the types of PMOs and we almost call it a PMO personality. But again, Echolocity, we're all about project management, work management, PMO, prioritization, strategic alignment, goals, and all that jazz. All right, so I'm going to dive right in really quick to make sure we're all speaking the same language today. What is a PMO? PMI defines it as this centralized function, and it really defines project management standards and the practices. And the idea is that it improves the governance and it provides support for project delivery, and ideally aligns with the business objectives. There's lots of different terminology associated with this. So a common alternative to PMO is ePMO, which is just an enterprise PMO referencing the fact that it's across the whole organization. You may have heard of PPM, project portfolio management. Again, that concept of managing multiple projects. Project portfolio management office or program management office, again, similar. We've seen a trend in the industry. Digital transformation has been around for a long time, but this concept of business transformation having its own office and having it across organization versus it being a project itself is really interesting. And then we've seen the rise of strategy organizations, chief strategy officers or directors or VPs of strategy as well, all kind of in this space of how do we work on the highest priority items and get the most value for our investment? I provided a couple of links throughout, just if you are looking for more reading and things like that. There's a great article, it's been around for a while, on PMI and project management offices if you are interested in the more academic view. Again, just making sure we're all on the same page as we're talking about a typical project flow. We're thinking about the intake, basically the initiation of a project, the execution of the tasks associated with the project, and then how we close it out. As we know, projects are temporary, which means they have a start and an end. Today, we're going to be talking a lot about approval and prioritization of the projects during intake, because with a PMO, we're focusing on oftentimes multiple different projects or multiple features within a project and things like that. We're going to touch on resource management because that is actually the #1 issue that people have with multiple projects, is how to assign the right resources to the right projects. And we'll be talking about the ROI, right? So how do we estimate? How do we have enough information to decide what project should move forward? And how do we measure the value of that project? We'll also be talking about it not just from a project standpoint, but from a PMO. Is there value to the PMO? And is it delivering value for the investment? So we'll talk about that as well. So from an Echo perspective, we have a little bit simpler definition of, PMO, just to kind of streamline. So we're really talking about, again, if you look back at kind of how we talk about project delivery, standardizing the intake, prioritization, and delivery of projects. And we talk a lot about empowering organizations to focus on the highest impact projects and really maximize the value of their investments. And so, again, a little bit simpler than PMI, which has a little bit more of a technical definition. But when we're talking about PMO, right, how are we using this data to make the best decisions for our investments and get the most return? So with that, I'm going to dive right into common challenges and the value of why we're even talking about a PMO today. So for common project challenges, usually I ask this, but I'm going to kind of rush through this because I have quite a few slides to get through today. So what is the biggest challenge you face with managing multiple projects? This is a survey that goes out every year to PMO directors, VPs of projects, and special projects and everything like that. And they get the information back. It comes from the PMO Outlook report. And again, it's annual. And for the last at least 5 years, the #1 biggest challenge organizations say for managing multiple projects is resource management. So do they have the right people? Are the right people assigned to the right projects? And do they have enough or too many? Are they being utilized appropriately? All that. We'll talk a little bit about that today. I actually have an entire webinar on resource management best practices and things like that as well. And it dives in a little bit more to the tools aspect of that. The #2 biggest challenge, and this has been worded a couple of different ways over the last 5 years, but again, very consistently #2, is project prioritization. It's also called strategic alignment. Are we picking the right projects to invest in? Then there is the visibility and reporting. Do people know how the project is doing? Do people know if the right things are happening? And then that kind of gets dumped in with risk management and things like that. And then project financial management. So I know you'll be shocked to know that some projects go over budget. They cost more than they're expecting. They have a hard time getting the right estimates from the vendors and all those things. So these are some of the biggest challenges that organizations anywhere from Fortune 100s down to small organizations have. You do not need to be a Fortune 500 company to need a PMO. We have lots of clients that are small organizations that still use that. Internally at Echo, we do. For project prioritization, because I did mention in the description of this webinar, we'll be talking about project prioritization methodologies. Which element of project prioritization is the most challenging? And this one is actually a wider spread. So the most difficult thing actually for people to do is to say no to some projects. So if someone comes in, they're really behind this project, they submit a business case or make an argument for it, too often it gets either left in a backlog or it moves forward, but it keeps getting resources taken away from it, so it never really goes anywhere. So the inability to actually just say no and to stop it from coming in. So it can be worded a different way other than just saying no to some projects. You can also think about it as, in the way Echo talks about it, is we call it works in progress. It's having too many projects happening at the same time, too many changes happening at the same time, and none of them having the resources or the focus needed to get the most value from it. And so people can be burnt out, exhausted, getting whiplash and things like that. So the number one issue, regardless of internally how you define this, it's really saying no or not saying yes, and not having it be part of the distraction of all the projects that need to happen. Similarly, and we'll touch on it briefly, is if a project starts, the inability for people to stop the project. So instead, it just kind of lingering out there and gets things taken away from it, but it never really dies. Too many people just think that as long as the project is out there, it's not failed, right? It's just kind of out there. It hasn't officially died. But that, again, very draining. So two of the other major ones, aligning with with the strategy, the goals. So there's an assumption that you have goals that you are aligning to and that people know about the goals, and that the goals impact which projects are agreed to and continue to move forward. The other piece of this is actually going ahead and what a lot of people call scoring it. And so what that means is, how are you actually getting people's input on what projects are the highest priority? And not just are the highest priority, but will have the biggest impact. How are you measuring that? And how are you getting people's input? And the getting of input piece is really important, not just from the information that they have in their head and their perspective and their visibility across the organization, but it's really important for buy-in, especially with executives, so that they will stay focused on that project and continue to support when things inevitably arise with changes or things like that. So again, top three here, not that we won't talk about the other ones, but how do you say no to some projects? How do you not do that? And then also, how do we make sure that the projects we're working on are aligned to our goals? Not just short term, who's the loudest person, but actually aligned to our strategic goals, our longer term vision. And how do we get people's input and make data-driven decisions about what projects are going to have the most value? And that's important for tracking and measuring and forecasting as the projects come in. But how to become even more accurate with that is also having the discipline to see how projects that have already happened, what value have they actually had, and learning from that. So I won't die on this. But anyways, project prioritization is very challenging. If you're here for that, guess what? You're not alone on that one. I'm going to keep going here. So if you already have a PMO, or you're pitching it to leadership, or you're on the leadership team, but you're trying to articulate it to other people, it's important that we understand what are the benefits of the PMO. And I don't want to say it's it's the opposite of the challenges that you have, but honestly, we do measure them that way. They do relate. So why have a PMO? The concept is you'd have a project management office because your projects are more likely to be successful. The logic behind that is that there's oversight of the projects. There's probably templates and or methodologies or tools. There's some sort of escalation path. There's some sort of way of working, how we work, associated with projects. And by having that governance in place, and on top of that, having some accountability and roles and responsibilities, it's more likely to be successful and not just chaos and fizzle out. Other benefits of PMO, that strategic alignment. So the understanding that not all projects get approved, and that just because someone wants to do something, they shouldn't. There should be some sort of intake, review, approval process that says, hey, this project is going to add value. It is going to get us closer to these goals. So huge assumption here that has been undermined for me by many clients over the time, which is assumption that there are organizational goals and that people know what they are, and that they're not just a slide that comes out once a quarter in an all-hands meeting, right? What are the goals? So some of our larger clients, they might have the goals, but they're not part of day-to-day. They're just this kind of intangible thing up here that other people are dealing with. It doesn't connect to the work that I'm doing day-to-day in my job. The other side of things, some of our smaller clients or less mature, they all kind of know what the goals are, But or maybe the goals don't even exist, right? It's just a general thought of like, hey, this is our mission, we're scrappy, we're just keeping on going. But there's so much fluctuation, there's so much change and things like that, that there isn't focus on it, and they struggle a lot with that executive buy-in and things like that because the changing priorities so often. Resource utilization. Do you have the right people? Do people have enough work? Do people have too much work? Or do you rely on single resources that become bottlenecks because they're the only person that knows that? Do you have the same person working on all the different projects? Oftentimes we say like there's A players or something like that, and that's the only person. And then some of the other people just like they either don't have visibility on this, or they can get burned out, or maybe there's only one person that has their perspective in there, and you get all the way to the end and find out that it doesn't represent the whole team. So definitely there's a lot here with resource utilization. We'll talk a little bit about resource utilization, but again, I have a whole other webinar I can send, and or you can join one in the future about resource utilization, because when we're talking about that, you can do it from individual resources and making sure that this person is assigned this task, or you can look at it more from like a role based, which is like, all right, I need a business analyst on this, or I need someone from the IT team on this. Or it could be even just team based, which is that there's a team of people and that team lead or something like that is responsible for getting that person or availability for that specific unit. So anyways, I'm going pretty fast here, but the concept of the benefit of the PMO, the value proposition is that resources, and those resources, most of the time I'm talking about people because I happen to be a service organization, a professional service organization. And so our consultants and our team member are our primary resource. But we work with a lot of organizations that their resources are not just people, internal and contractors and managed, but also machines or meeting rooms or locations or other things. And so something to consider, we're doing an implementation right now for an organization where a lot with supply chain and things like that, but they need a certain line availability or a certain machine availability or something like that. So again, resource utilization, not just people. We're working with another organization that's doing a major like month-long event. And it's important to recognize that, you know, stage availability or chairs availability for specific locations, also resource utilization. Again, benefits of a PMO, the concept is risk mitigation, so that there's processes associated with, I mentioned, that escalation path, that roles and responsibilities, and really trying to be more proactive in identifying risks and working with teams on mitigation strategies instead of constantly in that firefighting mode of issue management and or people don't find out about it until after it's already made a significant impact on the project. And then concept of a PMO is better collaboration. So oftentimes you'll see this in terminology with organizations, you know, breaking down silos, having better work collaboration tools and technologies. So whether you're task management or mentioning back and forth document collaboration and things like that, oftentimes PMOs can help establish culture and expectations around how you collaborate across teams. And so again, that's that enterprise PMO example that we talked about before, but oftentimes PMO can be part of that solution for work collaboration. Are there any other benefits of a PMO? We're going to get a little bit more into how we track the value of a PMO and how you make a business case about this PMO for your organization. But those are some of the most common ones. And as you can imagine, they pretty closely relate to some of the issues that we have for organizations that don't have a strong PMO or struggle with project management. I'm going to keep moving then. So we're going to move into some best practices for intake, review, approval, and governance within a PMO. So the first thing I would say as you're looking at, you know, PMO, and I didn't do 3 different webinars, so I'm just going to touch on these use cases quickly. So you may be in a situation where you have lots of projects, but you don't have this formal concept of a PMO. So you're actually looking to put some formality or some governance or standardization, and I'm calling that use case creating a new PMO, right? And whatever you call it, doesn't have to be called a PMO, but this concept of, hey, I'm going to have a list of all of our projects or all of our work activities, and I'm going to have some sort of process for reviewing, approving, assigning them out. Another use case that Echo oftentimes gets brought in on is, hey, we've started a PMO, maybe it's in ops or marketing or IT, but now we're looking to make it enterprise-wide. We're looking to expand it so that all of the different teams can be part of it, can use it. We're looking at bringing project management as a service across our organization. And then another option is improving an existing PMO. So, hey, we're having quite a few problems with project delivery. We're having things we're looking to improve either our quality or budget adherence, cost variance, and things like that. So those are the three scenarios, thinking about where you are. Does your organization even have a concept of a PMO? Maybe they have a PMO, but it's only a department or a business unit, and you're looking to expand it. Make sense, everyone? All right, so really quickly, just a couple of gotchas depending on where you're at. So creating a new PMO, what are your goals and scope? Why are you creating a PMO? Do you have processes? Do you have a concept of roles like a project lead or a budget or a sponsor or something like that? Do you have executive buy-in? Do you have an executive sponsor, someone that is going to back you up, or maybe you are this person, to really say, hey, this is important, this deserves visibility, this deserves attention, and it needs a place at the table in our organization. And if you don't have a PMO, if you don't have a tools for project management, maybe you have things in all sorts of different places, everyone doing things a little bit differently, very common. So you might be looking to standardize, putting it all in a single tool technology so that you can have better visibility that way. Okay. I would just say, if you are going on the path of creating a new PMO, be very clear about what your goals are. Why are you doing this? It's not just fun. It's not just because you're growing. So now, hey, we need a PMO or I'm looking for a new role. Be very clear. Really, the biggest hang up that we see with people trying to create a new PMO is a lack of buy-in. So do you have clear strategic goals? What does success look like in implementing a PMO? It's also not like a short project. It happens over time. So when I think about starting a new PMO, I really get people focused first on what I call different roles or hats. This isn't necessarily a job title, right? You don't need a PMO director in order to have a PMO, but you have some sort of leadership governing body. You have sponsors that are associated with projects. Oftentimes they have budgetary responsibility. You have some sort of project manager or lead, right? You have some sort of resource manager, someone who's responsible for the people that will be contributing to that project and what they do, right? And what things that they should be working on in their job. And then you have team members that contribute to the project. And so at Echo, these are the highest level. You oftentimes have other roles depending on your organization type and your project methodology and things like that. So you might have a tech lead or an IT team member, you might have an engineering lead, or you might have an analyst or a functional, or there's all sorts of different roles you might have, but this is kind of the highest level piece. Once you have those roles or those hats that people play, and yeah, guess what? People can play multiple hats. Oftentimes, and especially in smaller organizations or less mature PMOs, we see people that are sponsors that are also the project lead and also happen to be hands on the keyboard. So one of the tools that we use is, one, identifying those different roles and then starting to break down who is responsible versus accountable versus hands on the keyboard, right, for different functions of the project. So this is a very high level one. And again, you don't have to have a title, an HR title, as in I was hired as a project manager. Oftentimes team managers end up being a project manager on a specific initiative, but someone for each project that's been approved should be accountable, should be responsible, right, for whatever you say for projects. So first thing for a new PMO, starting to establish those roles and responsibilities and the process. When I'm implementing a PMO at Echo, Our process is always people, process, and technology, right? So there's people, there's training. What is a PMO? What is our project methodology? What is expected to me in these different roles? How are we changing? There's the process, current state, where you might be in multiple different tools, multiple different processes, multiple different ways of communicating. There's some sort of transition, and then there's a desired future state. So oftentimes we're talking about a gap analysis plan or something like that. And then oftentimes people do almost hide the implementing of a PMO behind the implementation of a technology, a work management technology, a project management technology, et cetera. That can look like, hey, we have 3 or 4 different technologies, we're consolidating under one, or hey, we're selecting a software. That's fine, but I would just say that there's some sort of transitionary period, and then there's continuous improvement of that tool or expectation moving forward. So again, very high level implementing of a PMO process, and kind of understanding what those gaps are. Echo does do PMO implementations. We do a lot of them across multiple different technologies, processes, and things like that. Some of the things is product visibility, productivity, prioritization, capacity planning, KPI reporting, and things like that. So I won't get too deep into that, but that's just an example. Yes, we do PMO implementations, partnering with internal resources that actually know the process and methodology, and giving some recommendations from our experience across many different organizations. So the second use case that I was talking about is taking a project management organization. So say an organization has a list of all your IT projects, but now you're heading into an annual planning or a strategic planning cycle, and you want to see all of the projects. Oftentimes this happens because there's a budget planning period and everyone's trying to figure out where everything's going. But you're looking to move from a single business unit, single teams list of projects to all the projects across the organization that need to be strategically aligned. So oftentimes everyone has their own process, so you're trying to consolidate, and oftentimes the most mature process will kind of be the place to start, but you need to take in some additional requirements. So what you don't want to do is have a PMO process where it has a 400-line project list of all the most complex things that you need from every team, but like most of the projects or most of the teams only need 20% of it. So using the 80-20 rule, but having something where you can compare apples to apples. So this concept of what does it take for a project to get approved? What does it take for a project to start, complete planning? What does it take for a project to go live or be complete? So trying to look at those areas where there is alignment across the organization for projects. We do see breaking down of different project types for expectations, fast-tracked projects, and things like that. When we talk about expanding project oversight, I honestly prefer the words like visibility, transparency, accountability. What are the different roles? Who is expected to do what? How do we know what the status of something is? What is the cadence of it, and things like that? And that drives right into this culture of project management within an organization. So what is that culture? What is that change management plan when we're trying to consolidate, standardize across multiple business units, all of which consider their processes unique and or have specific requirements? How do you have the flexibility for people to get into flow of how they work, but have enough consistency to be able to roll things up so that the right people can get the right information at the right time? So oftentimes this includes a scaling of technology solutions, whether that's, again, consolidating tools or providing tools that allow for connectivity and roll up across multiple data sources. So we do a lot of work in this area as well. If you are moving from a PMO to an ePMO, a big gotcha. What is your change management plan? How are you going to make sure that the right stakeholders are included at every step of the way? What is the communication process? What does that roadmap look like? How are you prioritizing the different pieces? I'm going to give you also make sure that you understand what, and again, I call it personality type, but like, what is the personality of your PMO? Are you supportive, which is really you're just providing access to templates and best practices. Maybe you help with onboarding of new PMs, or if there's a new project and someone's never managed a project, you're kind of doing that. You're a support service organization oftentimes. Sometimes it means someone requests a project manager from your organization. Controlling, this oftentimes says, you know what, this is what our project is. You cannot get a project approved unless you go through our process. You have to do these milestones, like these metrics have to be submitted at this time. And it really does, whether it controls the budget or access to resources or access to authorization, it's really providing those stage gates, those key milestones and everything that you have to hit in order to have a project within the organization. And then directive, oftentimes this is a communication mechanism as well, between strategic leadership or a governance board and all the different teams and things like that. So all access, all aspects of governing all projects. So prioritization, resource management, everything. Like there's a single direct, and oftentimes there is a specific role, a specific department, and authorization of project management across the organization. Okay, these are very high level. There's a lot more complexity to this, but if you're looking to go from a PMO to ePMO, definitely spend a little bit of time about what you're, not just obviously your goals of what you're trying to accomplish, but what is that personality that you're expecting to your ePMO? And is there a transition plan over time where you're going from kind of supporting to being more controlling until actually being directive? And if you are a directive PMO, oftentimes there is kind of a big bang or a specific launch where at this point going forward, you have to adopt this process. There's no other option. PMO hierarchy, there's lots of different ways to set this up. I'm not going to go through a whole bunch of them, but if I think about a PMO, you could be broken down into programs. At like a service organization, professional services like us, we oftentimes have projects that are associated with external like clients, and we have internal projects or continuous improvement initiatives. And oftentimes IT and or legal compliance oriented projects kind of get separated out as well. Different organizations handle it differently. We do have some clients that are more about product portfolio. So they have multiple different products and they handle it in different ways. Some are based on epics or sprints, and some are based on launches, like the launch of an initial project and then scheduled releases after that. And oftentimes, if it is an enterprise-wide PMO, they'll also have projects. So it's totally fine to have a PMO that is managing both products as well as projects, as well as potentially work streams or departments or things like that. That's actually very expected. It's really thinking about the hierarchy of the reporting mechanism of how you have to be able to parse out the data so that the right decision makers can get the right information. Here's another example where there's different business units. We actually have clients where they have done a lot of like merger and acquisitions, and so they have multiple different businesses that have to roll up. We have a couple of VCs that have that where they have different businesses. We also have different business units, again, like IT versus ops versus customer support or sales and marketing or something like that. And oftentimes within that, you can have the different business units, and that's a level of reporting. But then underneath that, there could be unique requirements associated with, oh, hey, this business unit has a couple of programs and they have some projects that don't belong to programs. You could have a situation where you have a unit, like we have an engineering unit or something like that, that has projects, but they also have products and they also organize via work streams. So making sure that, again, apples to apples, how do we make it so that there is different layers that can roll up, so that people that are trying to make prioritization decisions are able to understand the status of across. All right. I'm not going to go deep into this, but when you're rolling out a PMO or you're enhancing an enterprise PMO, it's not a like 1 to 3 month project. It's a continuous improvement. It's adding additional functionality. There's a lot that you can't really do until you have data. A lot of organizations don't have great project historical data. So oftentimes when we're working with an organization to roll out their PMO or enhance their PMO, it really is about capturing data and then being able to look at quarter over quarter, month over quarter over quarter, annual, year over year, and things like that. And it's just setting up that governance and that progress. A lot of organizations, they do like a big prioritization exercise at the beginning of the year on their budget, and then they're less certain about the cadence of, hey, guess what? New projects came in, business needs change. How do we prioritize over time? So when we do a gap analysis or a PMO maturity assessment, oftentimes one of the deliverables is a high-level roadmap and just recommending how you would approach the different priorities over time. So continuous improvement, one of the things we'll talk just briefly about is actually tracking the value of a PMO. And how we're tracking, how we're looking at inefficiencies. So one of the big things is just, do you have retrospectives and do you have lessons learned? And when you learn one lesson on one project, how does that get transferred to other projects that are in progress, or at least any new projects that start after that, where you can actually learn from that, make changes on the fly? And then training, governance, reporting, all those things. So at the highest level for continuous improvement, probably the most common thing we see is a request to get them closer to data-driven decisions. So what's going on, what's the value, consistency in tracking of these different things. So some PMO KPI examples. So on-time delivery, the date that you said it was going to go live, did it go live? Did it complete when you said it was going to? The original budget, was there a variance in cost? Did you go over budget? How many changes were there? Process compliance. So if you have a specific methodology or expectation, either with vendors or in-house, did you follow the process? Did you get the deliverables that you needed? Resource utilization. So a metric would be, hey, our resource utilization was 78% last year, and we're targeting 82% this year. So we're using our resources more effectively is the concept, or using more of your resources. Quality, lots of different ways to track this depending on your industry and your company and things like that. But that can be based on specific defects or complaints, or the scope of the deliverables that are done. There's a lot of different ways to track this. Stakeholder satisfaction and customer satisfaction, two separate things, but depending on your organization, one might be tracked more than the other. But do your stakeholders find value in the PMO? That's a really important thing. So do they feel that by having a PMO and by having this structure, projects are more effective and you get more value from the projects? Or do they feel like, oh, I have to go through the PMO, everything's going to take way longer and be so frustrating, and they have so many processes? Perception really matters of the individuals that are going through this. Do they view it as a service, or do they view it as, a constraint? And customer satisfaction. So again, we're a service organization, so this is critical for us. But the end customer, so what you're delivering in your projects, is it great? Return on investment. Lots of different ways to measure this, right? So how much is it costing to do the project? And what would happen if the project wasn't done? Or potentially adjustments of scope. So ROI, I've done an entire workshop on calculating ROI. Every organization's a little bit different. Project success rate, again, how do you define project success? So what I want to just call out is having KPIs is awesome, great, awesome. But do you know how to collect data? Do you know how to measure for these different metrics? Do you do it consistently enough? And are you monitoring this? And then are you actually using that information proactively? So each organization should tailor their KPIs based on their goals of why they have their PMO and what they can track consistently and have consistent data from and things like that. So thinking about different types of metrics: financial, performance, alignment, strategic alignment, efficiency, satisfaction. So oftentimes use your strategic goals to inform your metrics, use issues that you're having, which would drive why you're having a PMO and what you're looking to do, to help inform your metrics. and just make sure that your metrics are measurable and that you have a methodology for tracking it, and that there can be trust associated with it. Otherwise, it can be a whole bunch of work and not actually utilized for decision making. Extremely high level visual of PMO maturity. Do you have a list of all of your projects? Do you have a way that people can request new projects? Do you know what is the minimum information you need to have about a project? Do you have a concept of roles on a project and or what the workflow is over the course of the life of the project? So that's some of those crawl minimum pieces. And oftentimes it's more focused on list of projects and the actual project high-level methodology. Then actually having some more consistency in terms of adopting and approving, and oftentimes starting to automate some of those processes, having some additional educational resources and templates, and being able to pull from previous project history and retrospectives. We call this walking. And then running. So you have a prioritization process, you have a lot of these workflows automated, they're integrated with your other data systems, so there's not a lot of manual rework and things like that. You're in the optimization process, there's some sort of concept of, hey, this is what we're working on next, continuous improvement. You're measuring your ROI consistently, you have a history of it, and you're in an iterative process where you're constantly improving. There's a lot more to it but just think about where you are in your PMO maturity. And oh, by the way, Echo does PMO maturity assessments. And we do this through a wide variety of different methods, but at a high level, what's your current state of your PMO? What's the impression of your PMO? What do people think? And what should your roadmap be going forward in terms of what you're looking at? And there's different methodologies for tracking this. So strategic, tactical, operations, lots of different things that go into this. It really depends on each organization. But, oh, and we also do project management training. And again, all tailored to the specific thing. So now, I'm sorry, was there a question? So project prioritization. So at the beginning, we talked about what are the kind of key challenges in the PMO that are facing PMOs. And project prioritization is one of those major ones. So we have limited resources, time, budget, personnel, devices, machines, etc. There's competing priorities. So different stakeholders have different priorities, different departments or business units have different priorities. We're not really sure how to estimate the value of the project. We don't know how long it's going to take to get the return. We don't know how much time to spend on trying to estimate it and things like that. Sometimes we underestimate and think it's super small and we don't even need it to be a project. We constantly struggle with urgent and support and day-to-day operations with kind of important longer-term initiatives. And that balancing of urgent versus important is at an organization level as well as an individual level, that oftentimes people are on multiple different projects and they're making these judgment calls every single day about what to work on. And so visibility on the priorities and informing people and giving people the tools and the data they need in order to be constantly making these informed decisions, hopefully. And challenges of project prioritization. What are you prioritizing against? So what are those organizational objectives? And oftentimes organizations have multiple different layers of objectives and goals. So there could be a strategic plan that might be 3 years out. There could be specific OKRs or KPIs that are associated with annual targets or quarterly targets. Then within a business unit, there could be something within a specific team or an individual and their goals associated with their own promotion path. Like, prioritization is hard. Let's not even talk about work-life balance and the fact that your employees and your team members are people that also have priorities in their own lives in addition to their work lives. So prioritization is hard. When we don't prioritize, what happens? We waste resources on low impact projects. We get a lot of projects that just hang out and either don't go live or go live with something, or don't, they either don't complete, or they do complete, but it's disruptive and we don't get the value we're expecting from it. If we don't prioritize projects and we lose competitive advantage, like we're not staying, the classic example of the buggy whip factory with people are doing cars, but competitive advantage, we're constantly trying to keep fresh and move forward. Siloed teams, right? People are burnt out. People are only focused on their own projects, and maybe I need resources for an IT project, but marketing's not giving that. And honestly, not hitting our strategic goals, right? Just doing work because the loudest or highest paid person is saying it and not actually paying attention to whether or not that is moving our longer term goals ahead. So there's a lot of issues with, and honestly, a lot of organizations don't prioritize projects, don't have a methodology associated with that. So if you're going to do project prioritization, I talk about prereqs, right? So what do you need for prioritization? One, who's going to be involved? And is it just going to be leadership, or are you including middle management? Or if you're a small organization, are you having everyone at the table associated with what's most important? Whose opinions are most valued? Who has the most say? How do you get that information from them when maybe a meeting, is it really having 20 people sit at a table? It's never 20 people sitting at a table. I'll give you the answer right now. Do not have 20 people sitting at the table and horse trading about what's most important. That's not what we're looking to do. But we do need to recognize who needs a say. What is their say? There's some sort of weighted concept of that. And how often, and then from there, who, and then when. So what is that cadence of the prioritization? So how often are people going to be included? When are we going to do this? Do we recognize that it's not just prioritization one time, but it's a constant evolutionary process of reprioritizing, and reprioritizing, right, isn't just saying, hey, this new project comes in, yes, I approve it, but instead, how does that impact all the other projects that I already said yes to, or how does that impact the other projects that I want to say yes to?
Can I confirm my reservation for this evening?
Skip, I think that you might be on a call, so I'm going to just mute you.
What table?
All right. So anyways, when, cadence of prioritization, reprioritization, and then what? What is going to be the criteria that you're going to prioritize against? So that can be financial, it can be the strategic goals, it can be the prioritization drivers. So when I say drivers, right, I mean things like risk, confidence factor that this project is going to have a lot of value. It can be complexity. Do we have the resources? Like, there are constraints that you can put in associated with how do we prioritize. And that brings us right into the method. How are we going to prioritize? How do we make this process data-driven? Make sense? All right, so make sure you know who's going to be involved, how often you're going to prioritize, and what are going to be the criteria. Strategic goals should definitely be part of this. Really quick, an example prioritization flow by role. So we talked a little bit about roles before. Every organization has different roles that might be involved, but there's some sort of requester role, like who's asking to do this project. There's some sort of person that's saying, you know what? Yeah, this project deserves more attention. Let's actually look at this and say whether we're going to prioritize it, whether we're going to compare it against other projects or not. So almost like a quality check. Oftentimes this is the sponsor, if there's someone that's a requester that's not a sponsor. Sometimes there's like a functional leader above and beyond. So if you think about an organization that might have 2 or 3 levels of hierarchy associated with it, it could be that a team manager or resource manager or something, and then after that, a functional leader that's saying, hey, this is going to hit my budget. Does it go all the way to the executive? Oftentimes projects can happen and it doesn't need to be, right, like all the way to the top for the executive to do this, especially if it's under a certain budget threshold or it's already been allocated during annual planning or something along those lines. And then when we look at this, we actually are saying, okay, let's have other teams that aren't maybe the sponsor. So like this is an IT project, but we're going to check in with finance or sales or ops to understand how it's going to impact them before we do a final approval, recognizing that that might reorg the list of projects, okay? So this is just an example of a prioritization flow, but just be aware that there might be multiple different review step where we add, oftentimes we talk about this as progressive elaboration. So more information comes in as the idea becomes further along. And I don't want to be intimidating about this, right? Like a project approval process can be very quick. It can be one step, but usually it has a couple of different steps of review to make sure that the information is there, that there's been some sort of evaluation or analysis before we move forward with it. So when we were talking about the prioritization pieces, one of the number one thing that people had that were difficult about prioritization is saying no, is nipping something in the butt and not adding resources to it when we know that it shouldn't move forward. So a couple of tips and tricks here. I know this is a word heavy slide. I'll send out the deck afterwards, but staying empathetic, right? Acknowledging the fact that effort has been put into it, that there's passion, that someone thinks that this is valuable, right? When you do say no, or you are going to say no, or you're saying, hey, this isn't moving forward, documenting the decision so that it's not whack-a-mole and it pops up over and over and over again with a couple of different names. So definitely making sure that it's logged and it's communicated out. So don't kill it and then not tell anyone, and then it pops up and people ask for status and things over and over again. It becomes worse. Transparent. Why is the project not moving forward? Ideally, alignment to the goals or something like that. If there are questions associated with it, you can send it back, to try to go through the process again. Presenting data, especially if you do have what we're prioritizing against, what are the drivers, what are the metrics that support the decision. And maybe it is as much as saying like, hey, this team already has 5 different projects going on. Like we can't afford another project this year. We can't have this team have even more change happening. Alternatives. So whether it is postponing it, making it smaller, adding it to an existing project, there's other ways of handling this as well. But don't just dangle hope because you don't want to say no. Like all of these things are draining to the PMO. They're draining to the people behind it. They undermine the value of the PMO, but they also undermine just buy-in in general and people feeling valued. So saying no is absolutely critical. Probably the number one easiest way for me to tell the maturity of a new organization for projects is just finding out what percentage of projects get approved. Because if 99% of your projects are getting approved, one of 2 things are happening. 1, you're just saying yes to everything and not looking at the analysis of what's happening. Or 2, you put such a high bar in there for what you need in order for a project to even be considered. You've already done a whole bunch of work, right, without being aware of potential other projects. So I would just say, being able to say no, absolutely critical. We're running out of time. So prioritization methodologies, I'll just mention 3 of them. If you're talking about individual features and individual projects or epics or something like that, oftentimes what you'll hear about is the Eisenhower method, which is important versus urgent, or the Moscow method in terms of must have, can have, things like that. Or first in, first out. There's a lot of different things. But when I'm talking about PMO prioritization across projects, oftentimes the simplest one, which is not simple for humans to do, but simplest in terms of this is what most organizations I think actually have, are sequential, which is like, hey, we have these 20 projects and these are the top 3 projects, 1, 2, and 3. And then these are the next 3, 4, 4, 5, 6 projects. So they literally just take all the projects and just put them in order. Now, oftentimes that it means that there's like 1 or 2 people that are just doing it in their heads and the methodology isn't really out there. The next level is what's called weighted scoring. So you have some sort of set of criteria out there, such as alignment to the strategic goals. You might even have the individual strategic goals that you're voting on and saying, hey, this is the impact of this project or potential project against these goals or these drivers. And then the next level is scoring with constraints. So what that's saying is, okay, we're scoring it, but we're also saying that it needs to be within our resource pool. We're not going to bring in other resources, or it needs to be within this budget. So it's saying, hey, these are the top 10 projects if we assume that our budget is $800,000, for example, or $80,000, depending on your organization. Or so it's adding additional constraints. There's a lot more complexity to that. I'm not going to have time to go into that today, but I do have a whole webinar on prioritization methodologies. And we do work with organizations on setting up tools and processes associated with this to get the right people to have their positions or their opinions and their input into the prioritization of projects, and ways where you can see that not just in a vacuum where, okay, I'm going to rank this one project, but instead comparing this project to this other project and seeing how they weigh out. So actually, it's one of my passions. I built a software around it called Shoreline. So if you're interested in diving deeper into prioritization methodologies, don't hesitate to reach out, because again, I have a webinar on prioritization, and we actually have a tool that we use and plug into other PMO tools. So I didn't have a chance to dive in too deep on the prioritization methodologies, but I did give you kind of a couple of hints on that. So we talked about common project challenges and how to value PMO. We talked a little bit about intake, review, approval, and governance within a PMO. We talked about the roles and responsibilities and talked a little bit about the project sponsors and steering committees. We talked about project prioritization methodologies and the importance of project prioritization. And we talked about ways to track PMO value, KPIs, and alignment to strategic goals. Okay, so I've got 2 minutes left. I'm so sorry. We only got a couple of people online right now with us. Are there any questions about project prioritization and or PMO implementations or anything along those lines?
Hi, Molly. It's Debbie. I'm here. I'm in County Longford, Ireland. How are you?
Hi, Debbie. Good afternoon.
Yeah, so I really appreciate these webinars, and I love the way that you present the material. It's really accessible, and your tone is just right, and it's not preachy. It's educational. I love it. But I am here to kind of expand on an existing PMO, and I do report to a director of project management, but I'm kind of in an in-between position. I'm an active project manager, but I'm also, I've got 2 other project managers that will be reporting to me. So it's kind of like a hybrid between a new PMO and an enterprise PMO. And I'm kind of wondering, what should I prioritize? Should I prioritize pitching the concept and, trying to figure out the structure of, how it fits in? Or do I really focus more on how I organize the projects and the project managers that'll be reporting to me? I'm just not sure where to start.
If the role is a newer one, Debbie, and you're having 2 new people come in underneath you, I'd say the first thing to focus on, right, is consistency among the 3 of you and having visibility at the right level for you to be able to manage your project managers, right, to be able to report up, because you're going to start getting questions not just on your projects, but others. And then if you can create what we call an oasis, right, within your 3, and people say, hey, we want what they have, that then gives you a platform to make the case for that enterprise piece. But if you're just starting and you're having 2 under you, I would definitely focus on that consistency of methodology for those different, even if they're very different types of projects, right? Just how are you going to get the information you need on those projects without being a project manager? That's oftentimes a big jump. Because you don't want to have to know everything, but you need to know the right things. And how do you define what those right things are and getting that in with that team? Once you have that, you can take those lessons learned and apply those out. And that's a huge value to your organization.
And we're using Smartsheet that kind of helps organize a lot of that. So thank you again for some of your other webinars on Smartsheet, which were also helpful. But yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, Molly.
Thank you. It's good to see you, Debbie.
Yeah, you too.
All right, I'm going to wrap things up again. Molly Yanus with Echolocity. We are a work management, project management organization, and today we were talking about PMOs, the value of PMOs, and how to really get the most value from your PMO, prioritize your projects, make sure that your resources are allocated to the right and the best projects. And if you do have any additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out. You can check us out at echolocity.com. We also do business as Echo Consulting. You might know us. We have a lot of different resources on YouTube as well for videos. And this webinar will actually go up on YouTube, so you can share this with your other teammates to make sure that you're all speaking the same language about the value of the PMO and how to get the most value from your projects. Thank you for your time today. Have a great one and good luck with your PMO development. Bye, everyone.